Hello and welcome everyone to the long-awaited supercut of the first season of An Uncertain Future, the BokuAkaKuroKen Amigaverse. I'm super excited for this. As always, there will be bonus material. However, it'll be a little bit different this time. Because this time, instead of just having one bonus scene at the end of the series, there will be multiple bonus scenes throughout it. Multiple little scenes that never made it into the final cut of this fanfic and now are in the supercut. I'm super excited to hear your thoughts on all of them. There are 4 total, and I hope you will like it. Enjoy. Also, as you know, I promised season 2 for November and I'm working on it, so let's recap and then start with that. Kenma stared at the 2 red lines in disbelief. It felt unreal. They blurred in front of his eyes as tears started clouding his vision, but the image was imprinted into his brain. 2 red lines. Positive. There was nothing positive about this. His breathing accelerated. Somewhere in the back of his mind he felt the worry of his partners in immediate response to his own distress. A sob forced its way out of his throat. What now? This wasn't the plan. Fuck. The nausea he had been fighting for the past days came back with the waves of shock coursing through his body. This wasn't supposed to be happening. He was supposed to be sick, nothing more. Just sick. His hand straight to his stomach on instinct. He couldn't believe what was so obviously right before his eyes. He couldn't. This couldn't be. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't. The simple thought of everything that suddenly laid ahead of him, the future he would have never chosen for himself, sent him spiraling. It couldn't be. He jumped to his feet, staggering a little and reaching for the wall for support. With unsteady steps, he made his way to the gaming room. His trembling fingers hovered over the keyboard in front of the broad monitors. Hesitantly at first, he started typing. Accuracy of pregnancy tests. Symptoms of pregnancy. Soon, he was deep down a rabbit hole of information, each one more overwhelming than the last. Still, he couldn't stop. His throat tightened with every article and blog entry on the topic, with every symptom aligning with his own. He was at the brim of a panic attack. As soon as he would stop searching, stop sinking deeper, and let all of the information collapse above him, he'd fall, drown in an unknown substance of dark matter invading his mind. The sound of the front door shutting closed tore through the silence. It seemed deafening and shuttered his thought process. In mere seconds, the panic took over. His body moved on autopilot as he quickly buried the test in the trash and made a run for the bed. His hands clenched tightly around the blanket as he buried himself in the sheets. His fingers gently, trembling, traced her stomach again, and burning hot tears fell from his eyes onto the fabric. He couldn't handle this. Would it hurt the baby? If he panicked like that, was he already failing? He couldn't help the cries tearing from his throat. He didn't want any of this, yet he couldn't bear the thought of hurting the little creature within him either. It was all too much. Kenma? Boku took carelessly threw his jacket to the side, stumbled and fell as he attempted to kick his shoes off quickly. He cursed under his breath, ignoring the freshly blooming bruises, and started to climb up the stairs to where he knew Kenma would be. The pheromones deriving from the bedroom were ones of pure distress, tainting Kenma's usually very soft and light scent, closely resembling a forest in late summer right after the rain. It set him off. His own distress became quickly evident, even though he tried to remain calm for Kenma's sake. Kenma, where are... As soon as the door swung open, he searched the room for the source. He found the Omega curled up on the bed, covered by layers of blankets. It took all his self-control to approach him slowly, carefully. Kenma? He sat down on the bed and gently nudged his side. The smaller didn't react other than pulling the blankets tighter around his body. Do you want to talk about it? He shook his head. It was barely recognizable with the thick layers of fabric covering his small stature. Bokuto took a deep breath. Do you want me to distract you? Again, no. Only one more option, and the one Bokuto disliked the most. Do you want space? Kenma hesitated. The room felt eerily silent. Nothing. The ace sighed and sat down beside the bed. He said nothing, just stayed by his side. His eyes fell on the cat plush he had given Kenma years ago, which got the name Apple Pie by his online community. Gently, his fingers traced the stitches and played with the fur, before rubbing the scent lens at his wrists over the soft texture. He concentrated on releasing calming pheromones. Wordlessly, Bokuto offered the plushie next to where he suspected Kenma's head. It took a few seconds before a small hand reached from under the covers for the little cat and pulled it into the blankets. A tender smile spread on Bokuto's face before he turned around again, leaning against the bed. A notification popped out on the display of his phone, reminding him that he wasn't the only one affected by this. Kotaro, are you home yet? What happened with Kenma? His hand subconsciously wandered to the bond marks on his neck, where he could feel the distress of his mate spreading. Kenma's was still the most prominent. It was obvious that he had suffered a panic attack, though slowly the panic faded and blended with tiredness taking over his mind and body. I don't know, but I think he will be fine. Are you sure? Yes. At least, he hoped so. He couldn't bear to see his kitten sad. Bokuto knew that giving him space and time was the best he could do right now, but he wished desperately to know what hurt him. Why was Kenma this distressed? He hadn't had a panic attack this bad in ages. The ace sighed and pulled his knees to his chest. His eyes closed and a single tear fell onto his sleeve. Kenma's emotions were overwhelming through their bond, and to think that this was just an echo of what the younger truly felt made his heart ache. He wanted to make everything that hurt or could hurt him go away, to place himself between him and harm's way over and over again. Please, Kenma, be okay. Kenma woke up alone. The bed around him was empty and the whole room felt cold. He didn't need time to remember. It was everywhere. In his dreams, in the nausea that hit him the moment he got up, in each and every thought. He sat in bed, frozen. Everything around him seemed to move way too fast. It was silent and cold, yet it felt as if time was racing. As if it was running away from him. Faster, the more indecisive he got. His chance, the time he had to choose, was running out and he knew it, but it was as if he could feel it too. It took his breath away, and with every passing second, the choice got 100 times harder. It felt as if someone had put him in chains, as if his own mind held him caged. Kenma? Akashi gently pushed the door open with his elbow, since his hands were occupied with carrying a tray with food and water on it. Their eyes met, and Kenma could see a short flash of relief crossing the raven's face as he saw that Kenma was awake and alert. Here, Tits made breakfast, and I thought you might prefer to eat it here. He smiled softly and tried handing him the tray, but Kenma made no attempt to reach for it. Akashi's smile fell a little, and he settled for placing the tray on the nightstand. I'm sorry that we weren't here when you woke up. We wanted you to get all the rest you could after yesterday. He said nothing, just traced the patterns of the fabric of the blanket with his eyes. From the side, he could see Akashi's hands straying to their bond mark. It was the first time since they bonded that Kenma truly regretted it. It was something he had been afraid of, even before they were all bonded, to burden them by doing so. Now he was exactly doing that, and he didn't know what to do, how to stop. Kenma, do you want to talk about it? He shook his head. Akashi gulped. Okay, just please eat something, love. He got closer and gently placed a hand on Kenma's. We will be here for you if you are ready. Don't worry about us. We understand. Gentle fingers left traces of warmth on his skin, with tender touches as Akashi cupped his cheeks. Soft lips against his forehead made his heart beat faster, and the pain all the more real. Take your time. We will be here. Tears were building up behind his eyes. Every soft word, every little gesture of endearment and affection left another cut on his heart. It felt like he was betraying them by keeping this to himself. His head snapped up. Ocean blue met amber gold. Kenma's eyes widened, and the kind, compassionate smile on Akashi's lips brought him closer to the edge of breaking. His mouth opened, but no words escaped his throat. Don't push yourself. We have time. The first tear fell silently. The second was accompanied by a quiet sob that forced itself past the lump in his throat. Can I hug you? He wordlessly reached his hand out to Akashi, which the other immediately accepted. He pulled his mate into a tight embrace and soothingly patted his back. His own relief washed over them. He was relieved that he could do something to help, that Kenma, even though he never doubted it, showed him that he trusted him. Downstairs, Koro had abandoned his barely touched food in favor of taking Bokuto into his arms. Kenma's shutdowns were never easy for them. It had been a while since it was this bad. He rocked them back and forth gently, and Bokuto held on to him tightly. Of the three of them, he had the hardest time doing nothing. The ace was always prepared to move mountains just to make one of them smile. Nothing was too crazy or impossible to him as long as it was for them. As long as he could see them happy again, he would go anywhere, say everything, do everything. Not being able to do that was what paralyzed him. Knowing that nothing he could do would be enough to fight off Kenma's inner struggles, that the only thing that could heal his fractured heart was time, made him feel lost, useless. He wanted Kenma to be happy so badly. Wanted... Go. I love you. Bokuto took in a deep breath and pulled him closer. I love you too. So much. Koro smiled sadly. I know. He kissed the bond mark on his neck. I can feel it. Akashi held Kenma until he fell asleep. The food was left untouched. Looking at him now made the raven's heart clench and worry. Even in his sleep, he looked stressed, restless. His scent was still tainted with distress, and a worried crease appeared between his brows. He had curled himself up instinctively in Akashi's arms, making himself as small as possible. Akashi couldn't remember the last time he had seen the smaller looking so fragile. It was as if, out of the blue, his whole world had been shaken up, leaving him fractured and vulnerable. Subconsciously, he pulled him closer in a desire to protect his mate. Not knowing what had thrown him into a state of utter panic was maddening. He had been home just like every other day, working while the others were after their respective occupations. Akashi usually would have been with him. He didn't need to be in the office often. In fact, it would have spared him a lot of trouble if he'd stayed home that day. But he didn't, and now Kenma was hurt, and he still didn't know what hurt him. With the omega in his arms falling silent, it was everyone's best guess what caused him to feel like this, and Akashi didn't want to guess. Every option he carefully considered was horrible and made him feel sick, but what was he supposed to think when he saw what it did to his mate? He looked down at Kenma's face and lifted a hand to gently brush his hair aside and smoothen the lines of distress on his face. As the blonde strands fell aside, they revealed the mark highest on his neck. It was Kuro's. Just beneath lay his own, and just looking at it seemed to intensify the emotions transferred by the bond. He couldn't help but stare. It felt like he failed him. Hey, Kichi? How are you doing? Bokuta appeared in the doorframe, knocking softly on the wood, though it was mostly for show, considering he had already spoken up as he did it and gained his attention. Akashi just nodded. His throat felt tight and his eyes flickered once more to the marks. How's Kenma? Nothing's changed. Bokuta nodded. It was rare to see him discouraged, but Akashi saw no other way to describe him right now. It felt wrong. He felt the need to cheer him up wash over him like a tidal wave. But he let me hold him. That's a good sign, right? He tried sounding optimistic, though had to admit himself that it was a pretty weak attempt. Bokuta smiled sadly, but genuine nonetheless. Yeah, that's good. A long silence spread between them. It weighed heavy but not uncomfortable as they both mulled over the situation in mutual worry. Do you think we can fix this? A range of emotions flashed over Bokuta's face. Shock followed by surprise, followed by hurt and worry until it settled on determination much softer and subtle than usual for the ace. Of course, we're his mates. That's our job. He smiled and Akashi felt warmth spreading through the bond. It's been almost 4 days. 4 days, and Kenma had barely left the room to eat or drink. He didn't really talk to any one of them, and even though that was at least partially normal, not considering the amount of time, it had never been this long, one thing was different. Usually, Kenma would still seek out their touch, search for comfort in their hugs and company, and let himself be grounded by their presence. This time, however, he avoided them, hid away and rejected any attempt from their side to get closer or talk to him. The longer this was going on, the more tension accumulated in the air like fragile threads cladding around them, invisible but bothersome. and slowly but surely it felt like they were wrapping themselves around their throats, making it harder to breathe. Each day the net grew, taking their side and breath. Is it something about us? Did we do something? It came to everyone's surprise when Akashi was the first one to speak up. He was known to be an overthinker, but usually that was internal. Usually he was the most patient out of the four of them, the calmest and most level-headed. Yet it were his words, breaking the silence one morning. On one of the rare occasions, Kenma would force himself out of bed and into the kitchen. After the initial surprise faded, 3 pairs of eyes found Kenma's, searching for an answer in the ember cold. The air was thick with pheromones, and they could sense the slight change, as the already sour scent from the small omega soured further. A hint of spicy anger mixed with it as well, but it was faint compared to the overwhelming distress that had all of them on edge these past days. It's just that you avoid us and any attempt of us to get closer or comfort you. It would be much easier if you could tell us what we are supposed to do. Kenma lowered his head, deliberately letting his hair fall between them and his face. Koro placed his mug on the kitchen table with a sigh. Kenma, Keiichi is right. If you need space, we'll respect that, but you'll have to communicate with us. He paused and furrowed his brows. I know that it's not easy sometimes, but we were doing so well lately. I mean, with everything that was going on, Keiichi and us trying for a baby. Akashi could have sworn Kenma tensed further at that, and maybe even flinched. That was also something we could talk about, and we managed just fine. But that was the whole point. The communication had gotten so much better over the years that even when they approached the difficult topic of expanding their family, they managed to talk openly. It made Kenma's sudden silence all the more nerve-wracking. Ken? Bokuto approached him from the side and reached out a hand, offering comfort, but stopped mid-movement when Kenma backed away. It was as if someone had pulled out the strings, effectively tightening them around their necks. We are worried, Kenma. Although I wish we could just talk it through, it's okay if you are not ready. Just please tell us what you need. And if you are not sure yet, that's also fine. We can work it out together. I want to go to Shoya's for a few days. His words weighed almost heavier than the quickly souring pheromones in the air. The strings snapped. But, Kenma. Bokuto looked at him incredulously. A whine built up at the back of his throat, and he could feel his instincts taking over. His omega was hurt. He was hurt, and Bokuto was supposed to just let him go. It came as a shock to all 3 of them. In short, this wasn't what they had in mind when they said that they would give him space. He rejected them. Their mate rejected them. It was hard not to fall for the wild emotions invoked by instincts that lingered and boiled right under the surface. Is that okay? Please. He still didn't dare look up at them, eyes glued to the ground. Kenma, why? Is it really that bad? Is it us? Kuro looked at him with pleading eyes, praying for an answer, but nothing. Kenma, if there is something we did wrong, you need to tell us. No, you didn't. A few tears fell from his eyes. He took a deep yet shaky breath in an attempt to calm himself. Please let me go. Just for a few days. Bokuto tried again to reach for him and gently took his hand. Came up at his lip but didn't pull away. His fingers trembled, but slowly it subsided under his touch. Kenma, if you need space, we won't stop you. If that's what you want, we never would. Just please promise me that it's not because of us. You would talk to us if it was, right? The gamer looked at him with wide eyes, but nodded slowly. Can I hug you? He hesitated. It was nerve-wracking. The idea his Amiga would reject him scared Bokuto to no end. Kenma let go of Bokuto's hand. For a moment, Bokuto's heart clenched in pain, but it was quickly replaced by short-lived relief as the smaller tugged at his arm, signaling that it was okay. Immediately, the Alpha wrapped his arms around his Omega. It felt good to finally hold him close again, to feel his warmth and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The distress seeping into his scent was stronger the closer he got to the scent gland at his neck. He brought his hands up to scent him in the hope it might calm the other. Please be careful. He slowly backed away again. For a moment, Kenma's hands clenched around the fabric of his shirt tighter before releasing it. Bokuto held him by his shoulders and smiled brightly. It's okay. You will be okay. He placed a tender kiss on the Omega's hair. We will always be here for you. And if you need space, then that's okay. We are worried, but we can wait until you're ready to tell us whatever it is that made you so upset. He's right. I don't want to see you leave, but if that's what you need, I'll support you. Akashi reached for Kuro's hand, which began to shiver at his words. He looked at him and squeezed his hand reassuringly. It was hard for the Alpha since their instinct to protect was naturally stronger. We all will. Kenma's breathing hitched. Thank you. I promise I love you and I trust you. He lowered his head, biting his teeth together. We know. Akashi got up and rubbed his hands over his sweatshirt while he walked over to Kenma. Here, take this with you. Bokuto will give you apple pie and Kuro his jacket. Then you have something with each of our scents. He smiled and kissed Kenma's temple. We'll get through this. Kenma leaned into his touch before his eyes landed on Kuro again. Tetsu, will bring you there. Should I call them? Kenma looked down guiltily. He worried his bottom lip between his teeth and avoided eye contact. I already did. Kurok. Okay, just promise me that you will come back. His eyes widened, and with staggering steps, he rushed over to his mate. He hugged him from the side and hid his face against his neck. Of course. Koro smiled sadly and put his arms around the smaller. He pulled him on his lap and just like Bokuto, scented him to calm the omega and drown out the smell of distress. I know, but I had to hear it. He breathed in Kenma's scent. Under all the sour stress, he still recognized the calming scent of petrichor, mixing with Bokuto's earthy scent with a hint of oak wood, and his own that closely resembled the scent of pine trees. You come home as soon as you're ready. Yes. Yes. Koro nodded slowly and released the omega from his arms. Take care, and maybe call us, just so that we know you are okay. He took his face in his hands and tenderly caressed his cheek, placing his forehead against his. I love you. I love you too. The honesty of his words, confirmed by his feelings transferred through the bond, reassured them, though it didn't make letting go any easier. It was Saturday morning, and both he and Hinata had the day off, so Tsukishima decided to make them a more elaborate breakfast for once. He would have liked to surprise this biker with it, but waking up before him was close to impossible. He was proven right, as he found the bed next to him empty, and when he walked downstairs, he could hear the sound of a volleyball bouncing off the wall from the garden. Even on his off days, all that idiot could think about was volleyball. He rolled his eyes, trying to forget about the slight annoyance gnawing at him. This was just how Hinata was, and always had been. Tsukishima loved him, and his love for volleyball was a huge part of that. Still, he couldn't say it didn't bother him sometimes when it was just the two of them, and instead of cuddling in the morning, Hinata was already in the garden playing alone. While he was making breakfast for the both of them, the spiker might not even spare him a thought. He took a deep breath not to let his thoughts get the better of him, and focused his attention on the tamagoyaki he was preparing. He was so focused that he didn't notice the door clicking shut, and yelped in surprise when two arms wrapped themselves around his middle. Shoyo, I told you not to do that while I'm cooking. He was serious, but Hinata just giggled against his back and hugged him tighter. But you were upset. I needed to cheer you up somehow, and you like it when I hug you. Yes, I also like not getting either of us burned because you startled me while cooking. You didn't, though. He placed the tamagoyaki on a plate, turned off the stove and turned around to face Hinata, who, while letting him turn in his arms, didn't let go of him and just grinned up at the taller. You are impossible. I know. Tsukishima couldn't help the soft smile spreading on his lips and leaned down to kiss Hinata when suddenly his phone started ringing. He rolled his eyes as he recognized the ringtone Hinata had chosen for Kenma. It was the opening song from No Game No Life, which admittedly was very fitting, and stepped back as the ginger already rushed to accept the call. Hey Kenma! Tsukishima turned away not to let his discomfort show and finished setting the table to distract himself. He was so focused that he originally didn't notice the shift in Hinata's scent and the worry suddenly trickling in through their bond. Subconsciously, his hand wandered to his neck, and upon realizing what had startled him, his head snapped up and he searched for his mate in concern. Hinata was still on the phone, his brows now furrowed in worry, and he silently listened to what Kenma was saying, a rare sight. Wait, give me a moment to check. He put Kenma on hold and turned to his mate, visibly uncomfortable, and there was something Tsukishima couldn't quite place. Guilt? Why? Something is wrong with Kenma. He asked if he could come over for a couple of days, and he sounded really distressed. Kenma never does this. Why didn't you tell him it's okay? Confused, Tsukishima searched their bond for any clue that could explain Hinata's odd behavior. Shoyo would never abandon a friend in need, so that he didn't jump at the opportunity to invite him worried the blonde. Well, because you said that I didn't spend time with you, right? What? I'm really sorry. I didn't think about it this morning. I should have been more considerate. Sometimes he forgot that while Hinata was an academic disaster, he was emotionally very smart. It was one of the first things he noticed to be really attractive about the Omega, as soon as he managed to get over his ego and admit that the spiker was attractive. And then, when I wanted to make it up to you, Kenma called, and I don't want to overstep and hurt your feelings by making it seem like I'm taking you for granted. Hinata sounded so distressed at the thought, despite it being such a minor incident, that Tsukishima was torn between adoration and amusement. He quickly closed the distance between them and took Hinata's hand in his, while cupping his cheek with the other and lifting his chin slightly. Sho, I know that you care about me. I was upset this morning, but the fact that you noticed and tried to make it up to me is enough for now. And I would never let such a minor thing come between you helping your best friend. It sounded like Kenma could really use your help right now, and of course he can come over if he needs to. I doubt the others will mind. Hinata let out a sigh of relief, though not without muttering something about this being anything but a minor incident, and Tsukishima chuckled. His heart swelled with love as he felt how much the ginger cared about him. He would do anything to never lose that. The ride to Hinata's was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, at the very least, BokuAkaKuroKen would come up with something to talk about. Or more precisely, he would find something to argue with Kuro about. Something trivial, like which character was the better in the last anime they watched, or whose ship had the better dynamics. BokuAkaKuroKen usually preferred the cheesy ones. He always got pouty when Keiji agreed with Kuro, since both of them liked the more complex and sadly, more than rarely, canon ships. Today, however, the silence was deafening. Kenma sat curled up in the back seat, head against the window and eyes observing the landscape, though he didn't really seem like he was seeing it. He was in that unknown abyss of his mind that left him numb to the real world and took his words. Kuro's eyes strayed over and over again to his Omega, and he caught the others doing the same. Akashi sat next to him and focused on releasing a calming scent in the hopes it could reach him wherever Kenma was in his head. It also helped the other two to focus when another scent than distress predominated the air. BokuAkaKuroKen next to him was as fidgety as always, but this time it was invoked by a nervous worry and concern for their Omega. Now that they were close by, it got worse, and in a moment when the traffic around them calmed, Kuro reached for his hand to ground him. They exchanged a quick glance, but didn't say a word, almost as if they were afraid to break the silence. Kuro hadn't even parked the car when the small Omega with orange hair rushed out the front door and greeted them happily. In all this mess, it was good to see that Hinata was still the same, jolly, zealous, and overall the epitome of sunshine. He wondered if maybe this was what Kenma needed. If this flash of orange, this ball of energy, could help him come out of his dulled state. He wouldn't be surprised since Hinata's energy was basically contagious. He could feel Bokuta's mood lifting immediately upon seeing his teammate. Then again, he always assumed that Kenma would avoid exactly that when he wasn't feeling well, that it would be too much for him. He sighed and got out of the car, giving a quick wave to Kageyama, Yamaguchi, and Tsukishima, who appeared in the doorframe, before walking around the car to get Kenma's things from the trunk. It was fairly little that he packed, but then again, some of his stuff was still here, and Hinata was always happy to lend him a shirt. Bokuta-san! Hey, Shoyo! How are you doing? He sounded almost as happy and energetic as always, yet the change in his attitude didn't really seem to bother the Omega. Great, now that Kenma is here. Behind them, Kageyama and Tsukishima scoffed almost simultaneously, which made Yamaguchi laugh. Kenma! The Jinja waved enthusiastically to his friend, but didn't run to hug him right away, which was probably for the best. One look at the Omega showed how tired he was. Akashi was the first to say goodbye, while Bokuta and Hinata were still arguing about their recent match, and Kuro handed Kenma's bag to Tsukishima, who met him halfway. Their relationship wasn't exactly what could be called friendship, but over the years, after originally losing contact for a while, they developed a mutual respect for each other. Now they mostly saw each other on occasions like this, because their partners were friends. I can't remember the last time I saw you this gloomy. Must have been after we won a practice match against you. He smirked teasingly, though Yamaguchi's chuckle exposed him. It was almost as if he was saying, "It is cute how you try to hide your concern." However, he was sure Akashi looked the same, or probably rolled his eyes when he simply answered with, "Yeah, sure, as if you ever won against us." Tsuki took the bag, observing from the corner of his eye how Bokuta said his goodbyes to Kenma, much less dramatic than expected, almost hesitant. When he turned back to Kuro, he found him watching his mates as well. Look, I don't know what's going on. Kuro smiled sadly. Me neither. Tsukishima measured him with an almost concerned look in his eyes. It doesn't matter. He will be safe here. I'll make sure Shoya won't be too overwhelming with him. Kuro nodded slowly and bowed his hat and things before making his way to Kenma. It was his turn to say goodbye. Come in, come in. Hinata pulled Kenma inside by his wrist and led him to the guest bedroom. Here, if there is anything you need, just tell me. You'd be better off telling Yamsake. He tends to forget such things. Kageyama grinned at the smaller, who in return stared at him angrily. You aren't even better at this than I am. That's why I said he should tell Yamsake. Their bickering continued while Kenma inspected the room and let his backpack fall onto the bed. Behind him, he heard a chuckle as Yamaguchi entered the room, squeezing himself past Hinata and Kageyama, who were still blocking most of the doorway, a cup of tea in hand. Here, I made some just when you arrived and thought maybe you would like a cup. He smiled warmly, welcoming. What kind of tea is it? Green tea. Kenma hesitated. Green tea had caffeine in it, and that was bad for the baby, right? His throat tightened again. He had no idea of anything. No, thanks. Oh, okay. The omega smile fell a little, and Kenma almost expected his scent to sour, but it didn't. Is there something else that you'd like? He shook his head. The excuse was already at the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything at all. Yamaguchi nodded, smiled, and turned around to leave, pushing the other two out the door with him. Hinata whined. Let him get settled first. Come on, why don't we play volleyball in the garden? It didn't take much persuasion, and soon the two were racing each other to the back door. To be honest, he was glad. He loved Hinata's jolly nature, and it was heartwarming to see him with his mates. At the same time, it invoked a whole new kind of hurt. He wanted this too. He wanted to be with his mates again, with no barriers separating them. Wanted that everything was back to normal, uncomplicated, without the lies and secrets. He let himself fall onto the bed as the first tear fell. His hands blindly reached for his bag, pulling out the first item with his mate's scent on it. It was a Kashi sweater. He cried into the fabric and held onto it tightly. I love you. I promise. He whispered the words like a mantra. I want to come home. He really did. It just felt like he couldn't. He was panicking, didn't know what to do, what was wrong and what was right, what his future would look like. Maybe, most likely he should ask his mates for help, but whenever he was around them, he found himself unable to speak. It was irrational, but part of him was afraid they would reject him for what happened, that he ruined their plans, or the way he thought about all of it. He knew that no one of them thought much about the gender stereotypes, but he couldn't help but feel as if he failed them as their omega. Yamaguchi had just placed a cup of chamomile tea on Kenma's nightstand and closed the door behind him as silently as possible, when suddenly 2 strong arms wrapped around him from behind. He recognized the scent of herbs and fresh dandelions immediately as Tsukishima's and eased into his touch. You're worried. You're not? He shook his head and gently nuzzled his nose against his omega scent gland. I understand, and I am too, but I'm sure he has his reasons. Yamaguchi gulped, but nodded slowly. He came here to get some space and cleared his head to deal with whatever it is that is burdening him. We should give him that. A tender smile tugged at the corners of Tsukishima's lips. And in case he needs a distraction, I'm sure Sho will be happy to oblige. The other chuckled and hummed thoughtfully. Yeah, it's just hard to see him suffer. The whole room reeks of his distress, and somehow he still manages to feel bad for being a nuisance. It's ridiculous. Tsukishima half amused as he smelled the hint of spicy anger tainting Yamaguchi's scent. He hugged him even tighter and gently guided him to the living room. I know, and you are, of course, right. The other rolled his eyes and a small pout appeared on his face. But it's not that easy. Just because it seems blatantly obvious to us doesn't mean that it's the same for him. I mean, back in high school, everyone from the club, and even people not, strangers basically, acquaintances at best, told me that you liked me. Yet, I was an idiot and denied the truth that someone this amazing. He kissed his cheek gently, then his neck, until it tickled and Yamaguchi was forced to laugh. And kind, and caring, and overall incredible person would like me back, causing both of us unnecessary years of mutual pining. His hands wandered to his sides and started tickling him for real. Tsuki, stop! He almost couldn't speak through the waves of laughter bubbling up in his chest, even though he tried to prevent it. Really, after that I was prepared for you sending me to hell, for ignoring all of your very obvious, maybe a bit clumsy attempts at flirting, or... The Omega's face turned bright red. I said stop. He covered the blonde's mouth with his hands. Slowly, the alpha pried the hands from his mouth again, holding them to either side of their bodies. His gaze was one of deep affection, the most Tadashi had ever witnessed. But you didn't. I will forever be grateful for that. The fact that you accepted me, a stoic and stupid alpha, as your mate, me out of all people, means the world to me. He leaned forward until their foreheads touched. I would do it 1,000,000 times over again. And I would love you 1,000,000 times over again for it. Their eyes closed as Tsukishima's hands traced his neck up to his jawline until he cupped his face. I already do. Yamaguchi leaned into his touch and savored the moment in his mind forever. He chuckled as their peaceful silence was disturbed by the sound of something crashing from their garden. And we picked up 2 idiots on the way. Oh, come on. You are totally smitten with them. The smaller gave him an almost teasing peck on the lips before he followed the call for chaos outside. Tsukishima managed to get his mind off the things bugging him, and he was grateful, even though at this rate it didn't seem like they were gone for long. He just hoped Kenma would recover fast. In the evening, they were all preparing dinner together, minus Kenma, who still hadn't left the guest room since he arrived. Kageyama noticed that his Omega got lost in thoughts and gently nudged him in the side, lifting a plate once he got his attention. Should I prepare an extra plate for Kenma? To bring to his room, I mean. The other blinked confused a couple of times until he seemed to understand. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Why? I thought Kenma would be eating with us. Hinata looked at them puzzled, maybe even a bit disappointed. He will, probably, but he just arrived. We should give him some more time to get settled. The ginger nodded thoughtfully before his signature bright smile reappeared. I'll bring it to him and check that he's alright. His smile fell a bit. He really didn't seem like himself today. Now it was Kagema's turn to be confused. I thought he acted barely any different. Besides his scent, that is. Are you blind? He was totally calm and sad and quiet. Well, he is always calm and quiet. Tsuki chimed in while chopping some pepper to their right. Huh? You too? And here I thought you were supposed to be so smart. He teasingly pinched his side. Mind you, I have a knife in hand. Sure, but we both know that you would never hurt me. He confidently crossed his arms while Tsukishima just rolled his eyes and mumbled something along the lines of, "We'll see." No, but seriously. He let his arms fall to his side. Kenma hasn't been the same today. What have you expected if he suddenly calls you like that? You know this is not one of your gaming weekends, right? I know. Of course I know. I just hoped I could make him smile a bit. I don't know what is going on, and I trust Kuro and Bokuto and Akashi-san that they would never hurt him, but I don't know what else to do. Kagema sensed the tension and stress the other managed to hide so far. Immediately he reached out and put an arm around the smaller. They all seemed to have underestimated what the worry for his best friend did to the Omega. The black-haired alpha started rubbing soothing circles over his arm and coating him in a scent that closely resembled the warm sand in a light ocean breeze. It must come as a shock to see Kenma this sad. Even when he himself couldn't really tell the difference, he still knew that something must be really wrong if he seeks distance from his mates. He couldn't come up with a scenario that would make him want that. The only logical reason he could think of was if they mistreated him, but as Hinata pointed out before, it was unlikely. Sharing a mate bond meant sharing each other's pain. It didn't stop everyone, but enough that the majority of cases of domestic violence occurred in unbounded couples. Not to mention that he knew Kenma's mates, and he couldn't imagine any one of them ever laying a hand on him in a violent way. Whatever the reason is, he is safe here and has time to figure it out. As his friends, we'll support him as good as we can. Yamaguchi handed Hinata the tray with food and water. I understand your worries. I have them too, but I'm afraid time and space are the best we can offer right now. The ginger nodded slowly, took the tray and made his way to Kenma's room. Kenma? The blonde Omega stirred awake from a restless sleep, if it could be called that. He blinked up at him with tired eyes. Here, we made you some food. He simply settled for putting it on the nightstand and stood a bit awkwardly in the room as he got no reply, already prepared to leave again when... Shoyo? Immediately his head perked up and he focused on Kenma. Yes? The other avoided eye contact, but to Hinata's delight didn't stop talking. Was there ever something you had the feeling you couldn't tell Kageyama or Yamaguchi or Tsukishima? Something you needed to keep secret? He thought about it for a moment before shaking his head. No, I don't think so. Is there something you think you need to hide? At first, the room was silent again, but Hinata, happy that his friend talked at all, remained patient. Kenma nodded shakily, his eyes searching for Hinata's for the first time since he entered the room. What is... He stopped himself mid-sentence and started over. I mean, you don't have to talk about it, but why do you think you need to keep it secret? I don't know. What if they hate me when I tell them? His voice almost broke and a veil of tears started clouding his vision. I'm sure they would never. Hinata walked up to his side and reached for his hand, holding it tightly in his. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with excitement. I might have never felt like this, but I think Kageyama has. He said something similar a while back. Wait, I get him. Kenma's eyes widened, but he didn't have the time to stop Hinata from scrambling to his feet and hurrying out of the room. Back home, the tension hadn't lifted one bit. With Kenma gone for an unknown amount of time, the house seemed empty and not really like home. The scent of his distress was still dominant in the air, and Kuro couldn't shake off the feeling that he would be right there when he opened the bedroom door. A small touch at the back of his hand brought him back into reality. Akashi stood next to him and silently asked to hold his hand. Instead of simply accepting the gesture, Kuro pulled him into an embrace, hiding his face against the black curls, dark like the depth of the oceans. It matched his sea green eyes well, and yet his scent was surprisingly sweet, like cornflowers and lilac. He's going to be okay, right? Kuro nodded wordlessly and pulled him even closer. Bokuto dragged himself into the house behind them, looking at the hallway, his eyes immediately straying towards the bedroom door upstairs, raw with emotion. Through their bond, Kuro could feel all the worry and stress accumulating, all the feelings and concerns they never dared put into words, and underneath all of that, the deep love that invoked this kind of reaction to Kenma's distress. The feeling that had become like a constant presence in his head these past days was now dulled, more faint at the edge of his conscious mind, but it was still there. He was glad. His gaze fell on Bokuto again, and with a sigh, he loosened the hug and put on a small smile. What do you say we order some takeout and get comfortable in front of the TV? I think we all deserve a pause now. Sounds good. Do we? The ace looked up at him, eyes threatening to gloss over and shoulders slumped. Our Omega just left us and we... Hey, he didn't leave us. He'll be back. I'm sure of it. He closed the distance between them and carefully reached out to send the taller in hopes it might help chase these ugly thoughts away. I know the situation is far from ideal, so for now, let's rest. We'll talk about what to do next tomorrow, okay? Bokuto still clenched his teeth, but nodded and relaxed a bit in Kura's touch. The evening could be called anything but calm or comfortable, but it helped. Something was missing, yet focusing on what was there helped. It took hours after arriving back at home and sipping through countless series without actually watching any of them, until they finally couldn't fight their bodies commanding them to sleep anymore. Akashi was so tired he almost collapsed. It was one of the rare occasions he let himself be carried, a task that Bokuto immediately accepted. Now, Kuro lay here in bed, staring at the ceiling. He was tired beyond words, but sleep didn't find him. Bokuto's words from before still echoed in his head. Maybe they truly didn't deserve the comfort. Had they done something that caused Kenma to seek his distance? Was he just too scared to tell them? His eyes wandered over to his other two mates, and doubt settled in his mind. He couldn't imagine either of them being at fault for the shift in Kenma's behavior, which left only him. Bokuto, although he fought it, had been overcome by exhaustion, and surprisingly, Akashi was the first to drift away, although Kuro could feel that he didn't sleep deeply. He was distraught by the events, emotionally drained in an effort to keep him and Ko going. Kuro doubted the worry and guilt radiating from him and tainting his scent made it any easier. As quiet as possible, he got up and went to leave. What? Yeah, he didn't sleep deeply. As soon as Kuro disappeared, the Omega woke up, confused and worried. Don't worry, love. I just need a moment. Understanding reflected in Akashi's eyes, and although reluctantly, he let him go. Kuro thanked him silently before taking his leave. His legs automatically carried him to Kenma's gaming room, which had been his makeshift bedroom for the past days. He stepped in slowly, immediately confronted with the lingering scent of his distress. It seemed to burn his throat, but he forced himself to breathe in deeply regardless. It would be a long night. Kageyama sat awkwardly at the edge of the bed, Kenma next to him. Hinata had just sent him here with only a brief explanation. The Omega seemed to have forgotten that neither of them was a prime example of socializing. The silence lingered in the room, along with unspoken words and the bitter scent of distress and discomfort. The Alpha took a deep breath, but immediately regretted it upon sensing the smallest pheromones. Instinctively, he wanted to comfort him, but needless to say, he didn't know how. Shoyo said you wanted to talk to me. He started hesitantly, waiting for the response that would send him away. Though, I guess he must have misunderstood something or jumped to conclusions as usual. Kageyama chuckled nervously. He looked up in surprise when the Omega actually started talking. Have you ever had the feeling that there was something you couldn't tell them? Your mates? He looked up at the blonde, puzzled, who still refused to look up from his hands. They were shaking slightly and grabbed the fabric of his sweater tighter. He seemed to avoid rubbing it over his scent lens, probably to savor the scent still sticking to the piece of clothing. I'm sorry. He said you had. His hands gripped the sweater even tighter, and his eyes wandered through the room, shortly hesitating on the blanket as if he searched for an escape, for a place to hide. The alpha blinked confused before nodding slowly. No, I mean, yeah, I did. No need to apologize. Kenma's head snapped around and he stared at Kagema with an intensity the other didn't expect. It felt as if he was staring into his soul, more intense even than when they met as opponents on the court all these years ago. He remembered the vigilant eyes observing them vividly. Everybody would. Kenma himself had never been the most noticeable from an outsider's perspective, but from the court, as a setter, it was hard to forget the piercing eyes that analyzed and understood every strategy in seconds, always countering it with a strategy of his own. He certainly never forgot. How did you fix it? There was something almost desperate and yet determined in his eyes. Kagema was startled but didn't look away. Something about these ember eyes, the silent plea reflected in them, the burning intensity or the glistening of tears in them, didn't allow him to. There was nothing to fix. We just needed to talk. Sounds a lot easier than it is, but if you want to be with them, it is your only option. He gulped, his mind straying back to his own struggles with the topic. What happened? He wasn't sure if Kenma was referring to the thing that caused him to feel alone, as if he had no one to talk to, no one he could go to, not even his partners, or something else. But he did know that he wouldn't be able to put into words what he felt back then, or why he thought he was alone with it. It had just been a fact, his reality. It was a matter of the mind rather than the truth. We talked. They did. It worked out. The problem he deemed unsolvable was never there to begin with, but it was hard to realize that when your mind was determined to find evidence for the end. He was glad, lucky beyond measure, that they had never given up on him, that he knew now that they wouldn't, even on lonely nights when his mind wandered back to these dark places. But he had to hear the words. He needed to hear them over and over again, and that was only possible if he talked to them, if he told them, and the same goes for Kenma. He didn't know how the older felt, but there was no doubt in his mind that their situations were at least to some degree similar. What if I can't talk about it? That's what it felt like. Was it really that much different? What could there be that he was unable to tell his partners? You won't know unless you try. These words were carved into his brain. It wasn't like he had been able to realize what the problem was on his own back then. He needed help just like Kenma did now. It was Sugawara's words. The silence returned, more deafening than before. Was that all you wanted to ask? He scanned the Amiga carefully, his posture and gaze, the way he fumbled with his sweatshirt, and how he worried his bottom lip between his teeth. It was one of the rare occasions in which he wished to be more sensitive towards others' emotions. He didn't really know what to do next. Kenma nodded and looked back down. Hesitantly, the alpha got up. When he left the room, Hinata awaited him already, although he made a point to look busy. He left their bedroom, an empty basket they used for laundry in hand. Kageyama closed the distance between them before Hinata got the chance to and nuzzled his nose into the orange curls. The light, warm, and most importantly happy scent filled his nostrils as he breathed in deeply. The small up hurt at the touch after the initial surprise faded. And? How did it go? Weird. I don't think I'm good with this kind of thing. He wandered lower and hit his face against Hinata's neck, right above his scent gland. It was comforting being so close to him. The ginger chuckled. He took a step back and gently kept this at his cheeks. I'm sure you did great, my alpha. Hinata felt the skin warming underneath his touch and chuckled again before pulling him down into a kiss. Look, I wouldn't have been able to tell him. I mean, I could say the words, but it's still different coming from someone who understands. He smiled and gently caressed Kageyama's cheeks before letting his head fall against his chest again and wrapping his arms around the taller. Don't sell yourself short. The alpha nodded stiffly but returned the hug. You could help, you know? Hinata shouted from the kitchen, even though it was everything but far away from the dinner table where Tsukishima sat, looking down at his tablet. I'm trying to concentrate. The blunt sent a glare in his direction, which the Amiga commented with a huff. Yamaguchi next to them, he sat at the other end of the table, rolled his eyes. It was sometimes hard to believe that both of them were supposed to be adults when they started bickering like this. The air thickened with spicy anger, but neither of them seemed to notice, while they continued sending glares in each other's directions. It just so happened that Hinata, the extrovert he was, preferred doing things together with others. But today, right now, none of them had time to help him, and after training, the ginger only commented with a frustrated groan he was on edge. And Tsukishima, who just happened to be the closest, suffered the consequences. Not that he was handling it particularly well. The younger Amiga felt his own frustration accumulating and the desire to smash his head onto the table grow, even though that certainly wouldn't have helped with the slowly intensifying headache. His thoughts were interrupted as a new, by now very familiar scent mixed with the others. He looked up surprised. It was the last thing he had expected, but unless he was hallucinating or Kenma had an evil twin, it was truly the blonde Amiga lingering at the door frame between the hallway and the kitchen. Even though the distress was still evident in his scent, and probably still predominating, he just had gotten so used to it that the change took him by surprise, it seemed to have subsided a bit and blended with a newfound nervousness. The former pinch server was quick to put the book aside he tried to read for the past 30 minutes and made his way towards their guest. Kenma, do you need anything? He didn't need to look around to know that Hinata's attention switched to them upon hearing his best friend's name. No, I was just wondering if I could eat with you today. A huge smile spread on Hinata's face and he happily waved him over. Of course! Come here, you can help me cook! A small smile tugged the gamer's lips upwards and he followed Hinata's inviting gesture. The ginger had completely forgotten about his argument with Takishima and just started rambling about his day, barely giving Kenma the chance to answer. The blonde, however, didn't mind. This was what he came downstairs for. A welcome distraction. He had missed Hinata's kind and jolly nature, even though it got a bit too much at times. Still, it was just what he needed right now. To bathe in the younger Omega's light for a bit and let it chase away the dark thoughts. In the end, he didn't really do any of the cooking, but Hinata as well as Kenma were perfectly content with him just listening while the spiker cooked and talked. Kuro! The alpha looked up alerted at the urgency in Akashi's tone. He could feel a fresh wave of stress itching right under his skin and got up to meet the Omega halfway, who had just come back from a trip to the grocery store. At least, he thought he went there, but when he looked at him now, the bags in his left hand were empty, while he clenched his phone in the other. Hey, Kiji, my love, what is it? He held him by his arms and focused on releasing calming pheromones, his voice soothing. He wrapped his wrist soothingly over Akashi's and searched his gaze. The other wordlessly showed him the display of the phone and waited for Kuro to catch up. It took a moment for him to recognize the app both he and Kenma used for tracking their cycles. Their accounts were linked, and even longer until he understood what the other was hinting at. Kenma's heat. It started 2 days ago. Supposedly so. I'm sorry. My phone only notified me now. I think I just... Akashi started to rumble. Kuro cupped his cheeks and lifted his chin a bit to look him in the eyes. We all should have noticed. It's not like this is your responsibility. We forgot. That happens. Don't forget how stressful everything was lately. The other let out a short, humorless laugh. How could I? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. He was quick to take it back, his eyes closed as he took a deep breath to collect his thoughts. Well, you're not wrong after all. The Alpha opened his arms, inviting the Omega into an embrace. He accepted it without much hesitation and rubbed his nose against Kota's scent glands, breathing in the calming pheromones he was emitting. Still, I shouldn't have snapped at you. Don't be too harsh on yourself. Have you forgotten that you had to be the one staying calm these past days and keeping me and Co from going insane? Besides, I take no offense. He chuckled slightly, tightening his hold around the Omega. He couldn't help but think that as soon as he'd let him go, he might leave as well. He bit his tongue. Do you think that's it? Huh? Akashi gently loosened his grip and Kuro begrudgingly let go of him. The stress. Do you think that's why his heat is late? He thought about it for a second. I mean, they would have called us if Kenma went into heat, right? Yes, of course. Unless Kenma told them not to. Judging by Akashi's dark expression, he thought the same thing, but none of them dared to put it into words. It was bad enough that they could feel each other's worries, confusion, and helplessness through the bond. I might have another theory. Bokuto joined them in the living room, scratching the back of his neck nervously. It was hard to say what was going on in his head. Keiji, you would have told us by now if you were carrying, right? They looked at him, confused. Why was he thinking about that now? This hadn't been a topic ever since Kenma had left. They couldn't think of such things now when everything was chaos like this. They would never do this without Kenma, right? He didn't want a family if it wasn't with Kenma. Kotaro, why? You would have told us, right? Akashi frowned but nodded while answering. Yes, I would have. But you're not. I'm not what? His mind was all over the place as he tried to understand what Bokuto was saying. Carrying. No, Kuro interrupted him. Ko, what is this about? Get to the point. Instead of answering them, he showed them the thin object in his hand. A pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. Kenma is... Kuro stared at Bokuto and the test incredulously, and Akashi could see his gaze fixating on the two red lines. indicating that it was positive. A stunned silence filled the room as they tried to wrap their heads around this. It was hard to put into words how the Omega felt. He was torn between excitement, surprise, worry, and shock, and guilt, settling in the back of his mind. He shouldn't be excited about this, not when he knew exactly how Kenma felt about it. The smaller never wanted this. He didn't want to be the one carrying, was afraid of it. It was okay. None of them would ever blame him. Their guilt, clearly evident through the bond, was proof of that. His was none compared to the Alphas, who undoubtedly blamed themselves for the turn of events. We messed up. Bokuto almost whispered the words. The silent tone of his voice was so unlike him that Kashi wouldn't have believed it to be his if he hadn't seen it for himself. He lowered his head and bit down on his lip. His shoulders were shaking and he almost dropped the test with how much his hands were trembling. No, it can't be. Kenma can't be. He never wanted to. He couldn't say it. Instead, he stammered incoherent words and phrases, trying to puzzle them together in a way that made sense. Tetsu. Akashi reached a hand out and held him by the wrist, as he did before, to calm him. It will be alright. Let's all sit down first. They did. Hesitantly, they made their way towards the living room and took a seat on the couch. So, what now? He didn't know. None of them did. This was unexpected. Days of searching their minds for an answer didn't prepare them for this. They hadn't even come to consider the possibility. Why would they? It was clear from the very start that Kenma didn't want this. Never. They had been so careful, hadn't they? At least, that explains everything, doesn't it? Kuro looked at them. Akashi nodded. Yeah. How? I mean, why didn't he tell us that he's pregnant? Bokuto tapped nervously with his feet, chewing on his bottom lip while staring off into the distance. He panicked. It's only logical. Kenma was always afraid of this. He didn't want this. Kuro's expression darkened further and he clenched his hands into fists. I'm sorry. We messed up. I don't know how. We were so careful. It happens. Birth control failed. Nothing is 100% effective. Akashi wrapped soothing circles over his palm. Don't forget that we were trying for a baby. Maybe we just messed up. Silence predominated the room, the air heavy with the sudden realization. But then, why did he leave? We could have helped him, couldn't we? Bokuto looked up, his eyes raw with emotions as the tears spilled over. Kuro gently pulled him closer to his side. Kenma is not good at verbalizing things that frighten him. It was as if the silence got louder by the second as they all got lost in their own thoughts. Do you think he blames us? The ace tightened his grip on the fabric of his shirt and gulped. Koro wanted to answer, but he couldn't. Upon being presented with the possibility, the words got stuck in his throat. He didn't want to stay with us. What if he hates us for doing that to him? It's a fault, isn't it? No. The black-haired Omega looked at them determinedly. No, it's not. And he doesn't hate you. A small smile spread on his face while silent tears fell from his eyes. He couldn't help it as he felt their pain flowing into him through the bond. He promised, remember? He promised that it's not because of us, and that he would tell us if it was. He doesn't blame you or me. More and more tears fell, forming a steady stream as the emotions became overwhelming. He just couldn't say it, you know? He's scared and alone, and he didn't know what to do. We all were so excited to finally try and conceive a child that he probably feels guilty that he doesn't want it, even though it was never supposed to be him, even though none of us would ever blame him. He sniffled. The others watched him with wide eyes. Seeing Akashi cry was rare. What he said made sense, but it barely improved the situation. Without another word, they took the Omega in their midst. It's okay. You're right. You're probably right. What are we supposed to do now? Bokuto hid his face in the dark curls. That's up to Kenma. The alpha gently wiped the tears from Akashi's and Bokuto's faces, a hypocrite to his own. We can't take the burden from him. He has to decide for himself if he's ready and willing to carry a baby. But we can make sure that he knows we'll support him no matter what. The ace nodded slowly. Of course. So, we'll wait for him to come back. I don't think there's much else we can do. If we just suddenly show up there and tell him, he might panic. He said he needs space right now. Probably needs to come to terms with this whole thing on his own. Bokuto nodded again, his gaze wandering off into the distance was scenting Akashi absent-mindedly, searching for comfort in his touch. Kuro. Vigilant, sea-green eyes searched his. What if we don't have time to wait for him? What do you mean? He leaned back to face him. I mean, well, I agree with you that the decision is 100% Kenma's to make. There is only so much time left to make it. He looked at him seriously. Kenma needs to be aware of that. We don't know when he conceived, and from what we know, he hasn't visited a doctor yet either. I think it's safe to assume that he's still in his first trimester, but we don't know for how long. Koro gritted his teeth. He was right, of course, but he wasn't sure what to do about it. Give him 3 more days. If it's truly just him panicking, I'm sure he will come home soon. He always did. Akashi nodded. "3 more days wouldn't change much. Hopefully. Nothing was set in stone for now, and however this would turn out, they would support him to the best of their abilities." The next day, Kuro found the Omega buried in a pile of books, post-it notes and markers everywhere. He handed him a cup of coffee while observing the chaos with poorly hidden curiosity. Akashi could almost physically feel his gaze, and the unspoken question was almost louder than Bokuto, who currently busied himself with setting up a shelf in the room they intended for the nursery. "These are books I got when we decided to have a baby. Most of them are about pregnancy, then some about infants, toddlers, children. You get the picture." He sighed. "Of course, I didn't think I would read them to care for my mate. After all, since Kenma didn't want to, I was supposed to carry. But I'm glad that I did regardless." "I have read most of them already, but I wanted to go through them again to make sure." A small smile tugged his lips upwards as he highlighted another paragraph. "And here I thought you were only supposed to highlight important keywords." Kuro chuckled. He found the concentrated crease between his brows and Akashi's efforts incredibly endearing, and couldn't help but tease him a bit. "This is all important." He didn't look up once. This was good. The air was lighter today. As shocking as it was to figure out Kenma was pregnant, and as much as they wished to go back in time and be more careful, they could only work with the cards they've been dealt. In the very least, knowing the reason for Kenma's behavior seemed to have lifted a huge weight from their shoulders. "Hey, Keiji." "What is it?" His words were muffled by the pen between his teeth. It almost had him laugh again. "Do you wish it would have been you? Carrying our child, I mean." The Omega looked up confused. "Of course. What are you talking about? We all do, don't we?" "Yeah, but that's not what I meant. I mean, would you want to be the one even if Kenma's anxiety was out of the picture?" "I don't think I understand." "You've been looking forward to this, haven't you? And now Kenma's pregnant, and not you." Akashi lowered the book and pen, placing both on the table in front of him. He thought about it. "I'm looking forward to expanding our family. I'm looking forward to being a father, whether that means that Kenma keeps the baby or that he doesn't and we try again. It doesn't matter. Yes, I was excited about this, and maybe even about being pregnant, but I will gladly leave it to someone else if that's how it is." He grinned. "For all I care, Yuako could carry the baby, if it were biologically possible, that is." He reached for Kuro's hand and squeezed it reassuringly. "All I want is for us to be happy. He'll be a father, whether we are related by blood or not. What else could I ask for?" The alpha smiled tenderly. "You thought about that a lot, didn't you? A little bit, but that doesn't change what I said. I know. Thank you. I couldn't ask for a better mate. You three are all so special to me. I know we can work it out. He leaned closer and pulled Akashi into a tender kiss. I love you. Cornflower and lilac filled the room as the Omega's heart beat faster, and he leaned into the touch. I love you too. Bokuto grew increasingly frustrated with the supposedly easy instructions on how to put the supposedly simple and minimalistic shelf together. He groaned when once more it failed to stay in place, but bit his lip not to let the sound swell into something louder the others might catch up on. Though he doubted he would be able to hide this for long, there was only so much control he had over how much he shared through the bond, and on top of that, he had the slight inkling that shutting them out at this point in time would be quite the awful idea. When he noticed his hands had begun to shiver, it finally broke him out of his stubborn determination to finish the shelf. He took a deep breath and slowly stepped back from the loose construction. Immediately, his hands balled into fists and his face grew hot with frustration. A few tears pricked the corners of his eyes and he wiped them away annoyed. Damn. Another deep breath, and he felt it getting a little better. His frustration had long ceased to be solely about the shelf, and he knew it. The events of the past days played on repeat in his head, and he was annoyed with his own inability to regulate his emotions and emotional response to things as minor as a stupid shelf. He had to remind himself to breathe deeply as he had been taught. Hey, Ko? He groaned and let himself fall back from where he sat on the ground until he felt it against his back. I'm fine, Tetsu, just stupid ADHD making me, you know. He didn't have to explain these things to his partners anymore, which made it almost more frustrating, but the gentle affection they extended whenever he got like this was very much appreciated. Can I help? I don't know. Kuro hummed noncommittally in response and stepped inside, suddenly laying down beside him. You think we should paint the ceiling as well? That distracted him and he looked at it curiously. Colors rushed in his mind, one possibility after another on what they could do with it. Perhaps. A sky would be classic, with birds and stuff. We could add some owls on the wall with glowing-in-the-dark paint, and some crows with normal black. Good idea. But then we also need some cats on the walls. Bokuto chuckled. He half turned around to Kuro as he spoke. You only want to indoctrinate them so that they'll go to Nekoma when they grow up. Says the one who wants to paint owls on the walls. If that's not Fukurodani propaganda, I don't know what is. They laughed and Bokuto's hand found his, and it suddenly felt a lot easier again. Tetsu? Do you think I'm childish? for not being able to regulate my emotions as I should. No, of course not. But that's what a doll will cry over a shelf. Hans, have you seen people try to set up furniture? He smiled weakly, but it only eased his worries a little. What if I won't be a good father? Or what if I'll be a bad influence? Too unstable. Ko, you are going to make a great father, exactly because you are who you are. You have ADHD. That's neither your fault, nor does it make you dangerously unstable. You might not be good at something like keeping things organized, or keeping track of appointments, but you don't have to be, because you won't be alone in this. You have us. They will have us. And they'll need us. All of us, and that includes you. Who's gonna prank Kenma with them, or make Akashi mad by covering the house in finger paint? That's just silly things. Silly and important things. Playing is so essential and incredibly important for a child's development. Ask Akashi. He buries himself in the books downstairs. And you, Ko, are the best of us at that. Look at Kenma. Yes, sometimes he profits from me and Akashi reminding him to eat, but he wouldn't enjoy it if you hadn't made it better, more enjoyable for him. It's things like that you are the best at, and that counts so much. He had turned to lie on his side and watch Bokuto intently. The four of us work so well together because it's all of us, not us three plus you. We work so well because no one is solely responsible to meet someone else's needs on their own. It allows us to focus on what we are best at. And Ko, you are good at so many things that we all need and appreciate every day. We supplement each other in the best possible way, and you are part of that. It won't be different for parenting, I promise. With every word, Bokuto felt a little better, but there was one more thing keeping his mind busy. And what if it's mine? What if they end up like me? Then we'll love them, like we love you, because they will be amazing, the best child to ever walk this earth. And you'll have your work cut out for you, because they will be a bundle of energy, probably enough to power the entire nation. And what do hyperactive kids like to do? The ace looked at him questioningly and Koda grinned. Play. Volleyball? Oh, they better. Just imagine your motivation paired with Kenma's strategy brain. They'd be unstoppable. Bokuto chuckled and squeezed Koda's hand tightly. He'd like that. Just wait. This time I'm gonna beat you. Dream on, Bakayama! Tsukishima could hear their bickering before he even entered the living room. It was 7 in the morning, and way too early for this. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes on the way to the kitchen, yawning and completely relying on his memory as he blindly made his way. It was too early. The sounds from the TV and Kageyama's and Hinata's argument slowly morphed into a steady background noise while he attempted to make himself some coffee without burning his hands. He took a sip, waiting for the caffeine to kick in and soothe his nerves a bit. He was still disgruntled from being woken up this early before returning to the others. The scene before him was surprising. He hadn't noticed it at first, but his two mates weren't alone and they weren't competing for the first place either. To their right sat Tadashi, more asleep than awake. His eyes squinted as he tried to decipher the images on the screen and failed miserably. And to their left, Kenma, who seemed utterly unfazed and without so much as effort remained in first place. He lazily nursed a cup of tea, having finished the race almost 2 rounds before the others, and traced their cards on the screen with his eyes. Tobio and Shoyo, on the other hand, seemed to have forgotten about the other two, which, in Tadashi's case, fair enough. The poor sleepyhead still tried to find the right direction and continued falling from every cliff presented to him, completely caught up in their own competition. The blonde alpha shook his head slightly and leaned over the back of the couch down to Tadashi. They know they have already lost against Kenma, right? I'm trying to concentrate. His words were slurred as he fell down another cliff. With a sigh, he slumped back against the cushions. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think they have forgotten about that. Not like any of us stood a chance against him. He sounded so utterly defeated that it made Tsukishima laugh. It earned him a half-hearted glare, but it wasn't all that effective with his eyes falling close. So, what is all this? He motioned to the 4 of them, his gaze lingering at the 2 troublemakers. Emma stayed up and played all night, if I understand it correctly. It seems to calm him. Around 5 a.m. Shoyo joined. You know what an early bird he is. But after getting his ass kicked for an hour straight, he got bored and woke up Kageyama. Since Kageyama was currently cuddling with me, I got up as well and... well... he yawned. Tsukishima chuckled again and leaned down to press a tender kiss to his temple. You look dead on your feet. Well, guess how I feel. He laughed again. There was just something about the tired yams that was absolutely endearing. It was the combination of him looking utterly adorable and the fact that he for once just said what was on his mind. Come on, I will get you back to bed. No, don't want to. He whined but put his arms around Tsukishima's neck regardless as the other lifted him into his arms. Just for a little nap. I will make breakfast and wake you up when it's finished. Okay. He nuzzled his nose against his neck and relaxed against his chest. By the time they arrived upstairs, Yamaguchi already dozed off again. The alpha just proceeded to tuck him into bed gently. Upon arriving back downstairs, he saw with relief that the battle was finally over, though it proceeded with them accusing each other of cheating. He sighed, but if he was being honest with himself, he wouldn't want to have it any other way. The pheromones the two were emitting, while being intense, weren't tainted with anger, not even so much as annoyance. It was just them, their chaotic, loud nature. Through their bond, he could feel the devotion and love underneath the quarrel. Good morning to you too. Their heads snapped around. Hinata's eyes wandered from him to the now empty space beside him where Yamaguchi had been before. Where's Tadashi? He didn't even notice? In bed? Really? What were you thinking waking up this early? He's not as insane as you two, you know? A small pout formed on the Amiga's face, making him look forbiddingly cute. It was his own choice. It's hardly a choice when you use your puppy eyes. What is it with you and getting up at 5 a.m.? I don't even have the energy to think at that time. As if confirming his logic, Kageyama yawned. He wasn't exactly a night owl either, but Hinata was still far more of an early bird than him. It didn't stop him from taking the Amiga up on the occasional challenge though, which usually ended up with them playing volleyball in their yard to ungodly hours. A small chuckle interrupted this short moment of silence, and almost instantly their attention shifted to the blonde Amiga. His lips were tucked up in a slight smile, and he looked off into the distance while nipping at his tea. You're just like Kotaro, Shoyo. The ginger grinned widely at his alpha. See? Tsukishima turned his attention to Kenma as well. Say, Kenma, what do you do when Bokuto wakes you up this early? I ignore him. The answer was instant as the smallest started scrolling through the game menu again. Mean. Besides, why am I the insane one when you stay up all night? Staying up all night is way easier and natural than getting up at 5 a.m. Who does that? Kenma didn't even spare him a glance. Having found a new target for a conversation, Hinata proceeded with his monologue while moving closer to the other Amiga. Wanna help me make breakfast? Tsukishima smiled at Kageyama, who, now that he wasn't caught up and bickering with Hinata anymore, looked about as tired as he felt. It was cute. You can also go upstairs and cuddle with Yams if you like. He's taking a nap. You look like you could use one as well. Kageyama's brows furrowed slightly. He shook his head and got up, stretching. I'm good. I'll help you. He walked up to the blonde and stole a kiss from him before proceeding to walk past him to the kitchen. It took the other off guard. Even after years, he couldn't get used to these sudden and rather unpredictable displays of affection. Kageyama always just did what felt right for him in that moment. Just like in volleyball, he relied on his instincts rather than overthinking it. And Tsuki, well, he couldn't say he hated it. And now that they were bonded, the others wouldn't believe him anyway. Throughout the day, Hinata noticed Kenma getting increasingly more uneasy again. The air around him soured with distress, and he caught him constantly burying his nose in the jacket he was wearing or the small cat plushie he carried around since noon. What is it, Kenma? Are you okay? He looked up confused. The blonde had been staring off into the distance for the past couple of minutes, completely lost in thought. Yeah, it's just... He nuzzled at the fabric again, his eyes glossy. Their scent... it's fading. A small sniffle escaped his throat and he hugged the plushie tighter. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm so emotional about this. He did know, or at least he had a very good idea why, but the more his thoughts strayed back to the reason that brought him here, the worse it got. Hey, it's okay. The smaller closed the distance between them and snuggled to his side. His warm sunflower scent engulfed them, and he let out silent purrs to calm his friend. I would miss my mates too. Another silent sniffle, and Kenma pulled his knees to his chest. I do. I miss them so much. Am I even allowed to? Huh? Hinata's head perked up and he looked at him questioningly. What are you talking about? Of course you are allowed to miss them. I'm the one who left. I'm the one still keeping us apart, even though neither of us want that. I'm a horrible mate. He buried his face in the fabric of the cat plushie as silent sobs rocked his body. Kenma, don't say that. You're not. I'm sure you have a good reason for all of this. And if you still want to go home, then it's alright, right? He smiled reassuringly at the other. You don't understand. It's more than that. It's not just me. He stopped himself. The words felt like lead on his tongue. It wasn't just him. Within him, he carried what could become their child one day. It felt like he was keeping it from them. The simple thought of not going through with this, it felt like he betrayed them. Hinata said nothing. For once, he didn't know what to say. The smaller Omega just stayed by his side, rubbing his wrists together to stimulate the scent glands in hopes it would calm the other. He didn't dare to touch him directly, too scared he might put his scent over those of his mates. Whatever it is, I know they will do their best to understand. And either way, you are more important to them than anything else. You can't know that. Kuro had wished for a big family for so long. He wanted to be a father more than anything. He had gotten less verbal about it when he noticed that it made Kenma uncomfortable. He said he was content with not having children as long as Kenma was with him. But Kenma saw the hope in his eyes after the topic first came up with BokuAkaKuroKen again. He saw how thrilled he was when they decided to try. Even though it had never been Kenma who was supposed to carry it, even though he was perfectly content with being part of this dream as long as he didn't have to carry it, and even though that had been established from the start, it still felt like he was destroying his dreams by considering to end this. He knew that Akashi and the others could continue trying, but what if it wouldn't work? What if this was their only option, and if he threw it away now, they would never have a chance again? Would Kuro even want him to be part of this dream again after he did that? Kenma wanted to. He might not look like a parent, but he really wanted to raise a child with them. Not alone. Never alone, but with them. It wasn't just him compromising, he wanted this. He was scared, but he wanted this. The only thing he couldn't do was carry it. It frightened him more than even the thought of actually having a baby at home. He was an Omega. If anything society taught him was right, he should be thrilled about this. Glowing with a pregnancy glow, or whatever, happy to fulfill his nature. But he wasn't. All he was afraid. Kenma? Are you sure you don't want to go home? I think you might need them. Yes, he did. He needed them so badly that it hurt. He needed their soft touches and reassurances, wanted their hugs and for them to welcome him with open arms, but would they? In the back of his mind he could feel their worry spiking. It was faint and separated by the miles between them, but it was there and it was real. And underneath all of that lay devotion and love. His brain short-circuited. He didn't know if he deserved it or not, their care, their affection, but right now he didn't care. All he knew was that he needed them. Shoyo, can you bring me home? I need you to bring me home, please. "1:50 a.m. It was 1:50 a.m., yet none of them had found any sleep yet. Sleep generally didn't come as easy to them as it used to ever since Kenma had left, but today was even worse.
In another life, we would wake up.
For the past 1.5 hours, the distress they sensed through their bond from Kenma intensified steadily. At first, it was just the usual tugging in the back of their minds, increasing slightly, which was already unsettling enough. After 10 minutes, Akashi had given up on sleep and snuck into the kitchen. Mere 5 minutes later, Kuro joined him, and 2 minutes after that, Bokuto, who never slept well without someone to cuddle anyway, slumped down on a chair beside Kuro. They had sat in silence, drowsy and sleep-drunken, but too worried to actually follow their bodies, commanding them to sleep. Hands found each other, fingers intertwined, and soft kisses were exchanged as a sign of silent reassurance. It helped, or at least, it did at first. After a while, the feeling in the back of the head slowly increased and became more and more front and center. Kotaro's hands around the mug tightened as he fought the increasingly darker thoughts invading his mind. For Kenma's distress to be this prominent, even with miles between them, it must be really serious. The only comparison he had wasn't a good one. Thinking back to that day only made his throat tighten. Back then, it wasn't Hinbakiji who had called out to them, in a desperate plea for help. He was on his way home from work, while the others waited for him with dinner, and suddenly all three of them felt a rush of panic flooding their systems, stopping them in the midst of whatever they were doing. The sensation was too strong to be a simple echo of the emotion they shared through the bond, especially with such a distance between them. Because it wasn't an echo, it was a cry for help. Akashi cried out to his mates to help him, and they followed. Of course they did. What happened today wasn't nearly as strong or frightening as what he felt back then. However, he couldn't think of another explanation as to why they could feel Kenma so strongly. There wasn't the same urgency in the feeling, but it still felt like he was reaching out to him. Go. Kuro placed a hand on his gently as always, yet firmly to ground him. It's not like back then. This is different. Didn't know you could suddenly read my mind as well. The ace gave him a shaky and barely convincing smile. We are all thinking about the same thing. It's similar, but not the same though. Akashi said it matter-of-factly, yet his hands were shaking slightly, and he didn't dare to look at them, his mind undoubtedly taking him back to that day as well. Bokuto stood up, squeezing Kuro's hand reassuringly before letting go in favor of pulling Akashi into his arms. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to remind you of that. Akashi reciprocated the gesture, nuzzling his nose against Bokuto's neck and breathing in his scent deeply. It's okay. thought of it myself. I understand why you did too. He bit his lip. It was similar. Too similar. He just wanted to know that Kenma was safe. He was supposed to be safe. Maybe he's having a panic attack. Kuro chimed in, his nose scrunching at the thought. As much as he hated it, especially since none of them were with him to be there for him, send him, and make sure he was safe, it was still better than him being in actual physical danger. Yet, he knew that the explanation was weak. Kenma had countless panic attacks before and after they bonded, some stronger, some weaker, and it hurt them every time to see him like that. But it never felt like this. They worked hard, just like the blonde Omega himself, to help him with his anxiety. It had gotten so much better over the years, until that night, 9 days ago. Ko, do you still remember the last time he had won this bad? When you came home early to check on him? The black-haired alpha looked at his mate, his eyes gentle yet raw with worry. The other nodded slowly, face half buried into the dark curls of their omega. Yeah, he was a mess. I was too, probably. It came as such a shock to see him like that again so suddenly. It was really bad. His grip on Akashi tightened as if he was afraid something similar would happen to the other Omega. Do you think that's when you found out? It was. Nothing else made sense, and they knew that, but none of them ever actually said it. There was something about knowing what it did to Kenma that was so much worse than simply being aware that he didn't want to be pregnant. None of the alphas was able to shake off their guilt about that just yet, and knowing, feeling what it did to Kenma didn't exactly help. Yet, they had to say it. There was no way around it. This was the reality they had to face. Timeline-wise, it makes sense. I have no doubt that such news could send Kenma panicking like that. Akashi sounded calm and collected, but at the same time he held onto Bokuto tightly, his zen being the only thing keeping him grounded. The alpha hummed in agreement. His head perked up as he sensed Kuro's zen souring. He gently reached a hand out to the other alpha, rubbing his wrist over the other's neck. Kuro leaned into the touch, embracing the comfort it brought. That didn't last long though, when suddenly Kenma's distress intensified again. That's it. Akashi sat up abruptly, freeing himself from Bokuto's arms. With determined steps, he crossed the room. Where are you going? Bokuto watched him confused, while Kuro was still frozen in place. His fists clenched impossibly tight until the knuckles turned white. He pressed his lips together, held in place by his own panic, threatening to overtake his thinking. We're going to check up on Kenma. He was breathing heavily while hastily putting on a jacket. It's enough. He needs us. He's calling out to us. We can't. I won't leave him alone with this. He needs us, Ko. Tears gathered in his eyes as he looked at his mates, pleadingly. I know. Okay. Tetsu? He gently shook his shoulders and kissed his temple. We're going to get Kenma. It's gonna be alright. He leaned his forehead against Kuro's, allowing the mask to slip for just a second to reveal his pain, before putting on a determined expression. They could do this. It's gonna be alright. We'll bring our kitten home and then everything will be alright. Kuro nodded slowly and accepted the hand Bokuto offered him. Suddenly, everything happened in a rush. They scrambled to put on their shoes and jackets while Akashi was already waiting outside. None of them cared that they were still in their pajamas, or that it was the middle of the night, or that it was an hour-long ride to Hinata's. All they could think about, all they could focus on was getting to Kenma. Everything else could be sorted out later and... Kiichi? They froze. The world stopped. The closer they got to home, the more nervous he got. Anticipation mixed with the fear and guilt still eating him up from the inside. An open display of the anxiety he tried to shove down into the furthest, darkest corners of his mind. If it wasn't for the overwhelming need pulling him closer to his mates like a rope connecting them, that overshadowed everything else, he would already have asked Shoyo to turn around again. The closer they got, the more clearly he could feel their emotions pouring into him through their bond. It was a bit of a shock to him as he recognized them as a combination of panic and worry, with hints of strange guilt scattered throughout. Their fear was only conquered by his own, and while he hated to feel them distressed, this time at least there was one good thing about it. It solidified his decision to go home. He wouldn't turn his back on them in this state. Kenma might be here because he needed them, but if they needed him too, he would stay regardless of his doubts. Don't worry, we almost made it. Hinata was completely focused on the road, his brows furrowed, in a serious expression that looked almost unnatural on his face. Kenma nodded. He didn't trust his voice enough to speak and stared at the road ahead just like the ginger. It was weird. After panicking for days, constantly stressing about their reaction, to feel his priorities shift the closer he got to what had frightened him the most. His instincts to care for his mates, slowly overshadowing the rest. The blonde wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing, not that he had much control over it anyway. He knew that as soon as his focus would shift again, as soon as he would see that they were alright, hopefully, everything else would come crashing down on him again. The question was if he could hold himself together enough to tell them, and if he did, if he would be able to handle their response. He doubted it. His internal battle came to a sudden halt when Hinata stopped in front of his house. His home. He was frozen for a second until his body started moving on autopilot. A pair of sea-green eyes set him into motion. Akashi wasn't looking at him. His eyes merely scanned the area in a haste as he proceeded to stumble to their car. Something wasn't right. What was going on? His feet carried him in the direction of his Omega as if he followed the invisible pull. Keiji? He was out of breath, even though he hadn't been running. He felt exhausted, even though his mind was the only thing keeping him up. But most of all, he felt relief. Not his own, not with everything that still led ahead of him. It was theirs. From the front door, he heard an audible gasp, and he didn't need to look around to know that his alpha stood in the doorframe right beside them. He could feel it. The relief was so strong it brought him to tears, and he wasn't alone. In a matter of seconds, arms wrapped around his waist and chest. The sense of his mates mixed and blended, engulfing him whole, while the sour distress slowly faded. Tears were shed, and broken, incoherent whispers found their way in between cuddles and soft kisses. And Kenma broke down. Everything he held back for so long, suddenly overwhelming. Every wall he built within his mind bursting wide open as his tears soaked into their clothes. It was too much, yet it felt so good. He was home. He didn't even have the mind to wonder what had them so worried that they were prepared to drop everything and leave in nothing but their pajamas, and at this point, he honestly didn't care. Not when he could feel that worry subsiding just by holding him and being held. He did what he had to do. He was there for his mates when they needed him, and now he desperately needed them. Tetsu, go. I'm sorry. His words were interrupted by hiccups. Keiji, I'm so sorry. I messed up. I'm sorry, I messed up. No, it's alright. Bokuto's voice broke, but he could hear a smile. You are home. Damn it. Kenma, you are home. That's all I wanted. He sniffed, or at least Kenma believed it was him. It was hard to tell in the entangled mess that was them. He's right, you know. Akashi's voice was impossibly thin, only audible because he was beside his ear. We love you so much, Kenma. As much as he needed to hear the words, they stung. He was so afraid of losing them. He had to speak now before his voice would leave him. You don't understand. He gulped, forcing himself to speak, but faltered nonetheless. We do. Bokuto singed his hair while plastering it with kisses on the way. No, I am... The words felt like lead on his tongue. He tried swallowing the lump in his throat, but it was impossible. We know, kitten. Go on the test. Kura gently kissed the sandland on his neck, waiting patiently for any sign that it would get too much for the Omega, that he would push them away. He went limp in their arms. It was too much. He didn't know what to think anymore, but when they stepped back to give him space, he grabbed them tightly. A sudden rush of panic burned through him like fire. His eyes widened. Were they rejecting him? No, please, no. He wasn't ready for that. He thought he could mentally prepare himself, but he couldn't. Please. He begged them, but no words left his mouth. Kenma. A gentle touch on his forehead. Someone lifted him into their arms. Hey, Ken. The worry returned to Bokuta's voice, and the smaller instinctively reached out to him, calming a little when a hand held his. Let's get him inside. This must be all a bit much. Their voices sounded far away as the exhaustion caught up to him. Kuro. He blinked up at him tiredly. It felt like all his energy had been drained at once, not that he had much to begin with after everything that happened. I'm here, kitten. We all are. We won't leave, so rest. It's okay. His voice was so soothing, so soft. I'm sorry. We'll talk about everything tomorrow, but no matter what, we will be with you. While Kuro carried Kenma inside, followed by Akashi hot on his heels, Bokuta's gaze fell on his teammate. The red-haired Omega still stood by his car, stunned by what had happened. The scent of Kenma's distress itched under his skin and he gulped. Thank you. Huh? His head perked up as if he only registered Bokuta's presence now. What for? You brought him home to us and cared for him when we couldn't. A genuine smile spread on the alpha's face, much less feral and enthusiastic as usual. It was tender, caring, and full of gratitude towards the young Omega. Of course. He's my best friend. I hate to see him hurt. He nervously fumbled with his fingers. I still don't know what is going on and why all of this is happening. And I know it's not my place to ask, but will he be alright? Bokuta nodded. I will make sure of it. There simply was no other option. He would do everything to make Kenma feel happy and comfortable again. Do you want to come inside? It's pretty late. You can stay the night if you want. The ginger shook his head. Nah, I haven't even told my mates that I was heading out. If I don't come back soon, they'll come for my hat. He chuckled, but Bokuta internally facepalmed. Even without everything that happened lately, he could tell with absolute certainty that they were most likely freaking out right now. No wonder when suddenly the connection to one of the mates faded and he was nowhere to be found. It wasn't like he was any more responsible. In all honesty, he would have probably done the same, but then again, if he were in Kageyama's, Tsukishima's or Yamaguchi's place right now, he would probably storm up blindly and search for him. Not that that would be any good. He smiled to himself as he waved Hinata goodbye. Make sure to drive safely. I will. The spiker smiled and waved back before getting into the car and driving off. They would see each other soon again on the court, and maybe then he could bring him some good news. He hoped so. Inside, he followed his mates upstairs to their bedroom. To his surprise, they weren't all cuddled up in bed yet. Kuro still had Kenma in his arms, his muscles slowly but surely straining under his weight, while Akashi frantically gathered pillows and blankets to arrange them into a carefully constructed nest. Usually, when none of them were in heat or rut, the nest was a rather loose and open construct, an implied frame of pillows and even some plushies. Yet, whenever one of them, particularly one of the Omegas, found themselves really stressed or panicked, a nest helped them calm down. The alpha had to admit that barely anything felt better than snuggling up in a comfortable nest with his mates, their scent stuck to the blankets and surrounding him. You good? He walked over to Kuro, his worries subsiding a bit when he saw Kenma in his arms. His eyes had closed and his head slumped against Kuro's chest. He looked so peaceful in his sleep. Yeah, I'm fine. But it looks like I need to go to the gym again. Kuro joked while adjusting Kenma's position in his arms. He shifted his weight and leaned against Bokuto slightly, who in return put an arm around him and Kenma. Now everything will be alright, won't it? The toddler nodded slowly. They would make sure of it. Finished. Akashi stepped back to look at his creation and bit his lip to suppress the urge to continue pointlessly fumbling with the blankets further. He was a bit out of breath. This had to be perfect. It had to be perfect for Kenma. It's beautiful, Kiji. Thank you. His cheeks burned up at the praise, and he wordlessly motioned for them to put Kenma in the middle. They did, and soon everyone found their place around him, sharing goodnight kisses and scenting each other before slowly but surely, one after another, falling asleep. When Kenma woke up, they were all still right beside him. He could hear a whispered conversation between Kuro and Bokuto over his head. At first, it was all incoherent to him, muffled and distorted by his sleep-induced brain. But the more aware he became, the more he could understand. He honestly wished he wouldn't. They were arguing about something trivial as usual. Bokuto passionately defended his point, was struggling to keep quiet, and Kuro teased him. It was so normal that for a moment he forgot everything else. He just groaned as he usually would and hid his face in the pillow again when suddenly the room fell silent. Hey. Akashi gently brushed the hair from his face and smiled as their eyes met. Warm ember, cold blue. He placed a gentle kiss on his forehead. How are you feeling? like run over by a train. It was true. Even after sleeping for God knows how long, he felt exhausted. Akashi chuckled a bit and nuzzled his nose against his neck. That's okay. How about I'll run you a hot bath? It sounded nice, but they had to talk, and the longer they waited, the more his anxiety would grow. He needed answers, even though he maybe didn't want to hear them. The Omega shook his head slightly and sat up, leaning against the headboard. Let's talk first, please. The others exchanged a quick look, concern returning to their eyes, but they nodded. Okay, let's talk, kitten. Ironically enough, after agreeing that it was time, none of them dared utter a word. Kenma knew he ought to start, and gulp. So, you know. Bokuto nodded. I found the test in the trash 2 days ago, and when Kichi said that your heat was about to start, but no one called us, we put one and one together. Kenma looked up surprised. He knew about the test, but had completely forgotten about his heat. He never was good at keeping track of it, and the fact that it only happened every 3 months didn't really help. Not that he had a sense of time during the past days anyway. And what do you mean? Kuro looked at them questioningly. What do you think of me now? What do you want me to do next? What do you think of all this? What? He had a ton of questions and settled for what he hoped would be the easiest one. Why didn't you call me? You knew, but you didn't demand answers. Why? He gulped and tried fighting back the tears gathering in his eyes. We knew you needed space. We didn't want to force you to explain yourself when you weren't ready yet. Akashi gently cupped his cheek and caught the first tear falling from his eyes, wiping it away. I'm sorry. Maybe we should have told you right away. Kenma shook his head. They were right. He probably would have freaked out more, just like he did yesterday. He just didn't understand how they could be so patient with him. How certain are you? That you're pregnant, I mean. Kenma took a deep breath. I guess. I had this bad feeling and got nauseous more than usual, so I took the test. When it was positive, I googled and now that I missed my heat. That can happen due to stress as well. Don't get me wrong, I think it's the most logical explanation, but we should be certain before making any decisions. He sighed. Would you be okay with visiting a doctor as soon as possible? Kenma nodded. He didn't want to. Having it confirmed, even though he deemed it true all along, it wouldn't be easy. But he had to, and he knew that. Good. Thank you. We will be with you the whole time. Bokuto nodded eagerly in agreement. Yeah, we will never leave you alone, Ken. He smiled brightly at the Omega. Kenma, however, didn't reciprocate the gesture. Even if... He sniffed, no longer able to hold back the tears. Even if I don't want it if I don't keep it. Of course. Kenma, you are more important to us than that. We want a family, sure, but not without you. Not without you being happy. Kenma, we can always try with me later again, and I will carry our baby as we originally planned. Akashi squeezed his hand reassuringly. But what if it won't work? What if this is the only chance and I'm ruining it? His cries turned into sobs, shaking his body. What if I already have? Kenma, I was at the doctor's before we started trying to make sure. They said all is fine. I should be able to conceive at the very least at my next heat, so don't worry. He kissed the tears away and allowed Kenma to pull him closer and cry against his shirt. And even in the very unlikely case that we won't be able to have biological children, there are other ways. It doesn't matter, they would still be our child nonetheless. Just like when we have a biological child and it's from Ko and Keiji, it would be mine just as much. Blood doesn't matter. You're not ruining anything, love. We knew from the very start that you didn't want this, and that's okay. No one blames you. If at all, we should have been more careful. He exchanged a worried glance with Kuro, and Kenma could feel the guilt through the bond, shaking his head violently in response. You need to make a baby. Kuro laughed. I guess you're right. Kenma? Akashi patted his hair and gently tried to get his attention. Huh? I don't want to convince you of anything. The choice is entirely up to you, just what is it exactly that frightens you so much? It took a moment before he answered. All the while, Akashi continued patting his back. I don't think I can do this. There's so much to look out for. What if I hurt the baby? What if I already did by panicking so much? What if it's my fault when we'll lose it? He cried. The thought of having that inside me, being responsible for it, I can't. It's too much. Akashi hummed and let out silent purrs to calm the other. I understand. We all do. Kuro looked at him with wide eyes while Bokuto's were glued to the sheets in guilt. He had never considered how much of a burden it was, conceiving and carrying their child. Kenma took so much upon himself attempting to deal with it alone. No wonder he was terrified. Kenma, just know that if you decide to keep the baby, we will help you. We can make meal plans and pamper you all day to make it easier. That's our responsibility as your mates. After all, you would be doing the hard part. He smiled. But even if you don't, we will here for you every step of the way. We love you, and this is not worth risking your happiness over. Kuro nodded and carefully took Kenma's hand. I'm sorry, kitten, that we got you into this position. I truly am. I'm so sorry that we can't make the decision for you, but you should know that no matter what, we will always be by your side. Kuro. He cried out and reached for him as well. Then Bokuto. Thank you. I love you. We love you too, Ken, no matter what. He repeated the words like a mantra while sending the smaller. They spent the whole morning and early noon together, cuddling and reassuring each other. After a while, Akashi excused himself, searching for omega clinics, or such that would be able to treat omegas regardless, in their area, specifically those that would take them on such short notice. Thank you so much for watching this super long supercut of the first season till the end. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you are excited for the second season. I for sure am. Now, I have a huge favor to ask of you. First, tell me what your favorite part altogether was, then your favorite bonus part because they are new and I'm so curious to see your reaction, and tell me your favorite quote if you have one, all under the pinned comment. A special thanks goes out to my nerdy neckos who supported me throughout this whole journey. Thank you so much. And if you are not a nerdy necko but interested to become a nerdy necko, check out the join button under this video. It comes with some perks. Now, as always, here are my other social media. Tell me in the comments if you're excited for the next season, and if there should be one, it will appear right here. So, have a great day!
Step 3, think real hard about what you want to be. Step 4, everybody just do your thing.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up.